I'm Dr. Sharon Bolton, Dean of Student Life at International Students' House, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey from being the daughter of a farmer in Northern Ireland to Dean of Student Life at International Students' House. I grew up in Northern Ireland in the 1970s, and my family tell me that when I was 6 years old, and that's how I looked at that time in this photograph, my family were thinking about moving to Scotland, and they said to me, "Sharon, what do you think? Would you like to go to Scotland?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because I would have no friends and I wouldn't know the language." And that early preoccupation with friendship and language and a reluctance to go to Scotland really coloured a lot of my education. So I did 11 years in primary school, an extra one actually, because I was sent to school early because I was so keen to get going with education. And then I went to a grammar school where I started learning French, and then in my second year Spanish, and these were the areas that I really enjoyed. So here I am, aged 18, in my school uniform, on the cusp of going to university. And the subjects that I chose to study at university were French and Spanish, and the place where I chose to study was in Scotland, in St Andrews, at St Andrews University, which is famous because it's where Prince William met Kate, but I was there many years before that. So in St Andrews, doing French and Spanish, I had an opportunity to spend a year abroad, and that's when I got interested in study abroad. But prior to studying abroad, and before I went to St Andrews, at that tender age of 18, I had an opportunity to be an au pair in France, in Marseille. So I went to Marseille and looked after a family of 4. They also had grandparents, cleaning ladies, and myself. My job was mostly babysitting in the evenings and teaching them a little bit of English. And so the poor French kids ended up speaking English with a Northern Irish accent, and they couldn't roll an R to speak French properly. But onwards from that, went to university. So that was my first bite at the study abroad cherry. And I was a little bit afraid. I was 18, it was my first time out of my home surroundings, familiar places. And I didn't really make the most of that year abroad. So when I had the opportunity to have a second year abroad as part of my studies, and I went from St Andrews to the University of Salamanca, which is a really ancient Spanish university in a beautiful town that I'd never been to before, I spoke with my bank manager before I went on that year abroad, and I said to him, "I'm not going to say no to anything that comes my way this year, and I want you to make it possible for me to do that." And he was a bit of a grumpy old man, and he said, "Well, you know, what's a degree in languages going to get you? You'll end up being a teacher or something, won't you?" And I was like, "Just let me have this year," because I knew it was that year where I would be in that country. I had no responsibilities apart from my studies. I wasn't working. I didn't own a house, I was having a lot of freedom, and I just wanted to really explore it to the best. And I've got this fantastic photograph that a friend took when she visited of myself and these people who are called the Tuna. And the Tuna is a very old tradition, and these are students who go around singing and playing ancient instruments. And you can see on their capes they've got all the badges of the different places they've visited. And me and my friends, we absolutely loved these guys. And we would follow them around, and they would go around the different cafes playing their music and singing. And life comes full circle, because I actually saw them a few years ago when I went on a visit to House Bucharest, and they were on tour there. It probably wasn't the same people, but it was a nice reminder of the best year of my life, which was when I had my year abroad in Salamanca in Spain. So I came back from Salamanca to St Andrews. It suddenly seemed like a very small place, but it also seemed like a place where I wasn't going to be able to do all the academic studies that I wanted to because of the joint French and Spanish side of things. And I really wanted to explore women writers, and so I graduated in 1994 from University of St Andrews with my degree in French and Spanish. There I am, all fresh-faced and young. And from there I proceeded to look into doing a master's, because I still had this bit of curiosity about women writers that I wanted to pursue. And there were a couple of masters that I was interested in. One was at Queen Mary in London, so I almost became a London student. And the other one was in Oxford. And the reason that I chose Oxford in the end was because it was a combined French and Spanish masters. So it meant I didn't have to give up either subject, and I was able to do literature, which is what I was really interested in at that time. So I had 2 wonderful years in Oxford, discovering all the French feminist writers, Simone de Beauvoir, Colette, and some Spanish women writers as well. And from there, I was then thinking about a PhD. So this is my Oxford graduation photo, and that was '96. From there, I went looking for a supervisor, and the supervisor that I knew who would be good for my PhD was, at that time when I was in Oxford, she was at Queen Mary. And so we met in London and we discussed my proposal, and she said that would be a great thing to do and I'd happily supervise it, but you're going to have to apply to Manchester because I'm going to be the professor of Spanish there. So then up to Manchester, and that's where I did PhD studies for 3 years. After that, I started working. I did a little bit of teaching in the Spanish department in Manchester to begin with. And then I had a job as lecturer in Spanish at the University of Staffordshire, which is in the north of England, commuting distance to Manchester. And then at the time of the millennium, I moved to Newcastle, where I taught for 2.5 years at the University of Sunderland. And during that time, I was able to finish my PhD as well, and there I am graduating from University of Manchester, becoming the doctor that I now am. After 2.5 years at Sunderland, I was in a department which had about 20 staff for modern languages, and the demand for language studies at that university was decreasing, unfortunately. I was on a very fixed-term contract which was being extended from year to year, and then eventually the numbers dropped to such an extent that my contract was not going to be extended. And that's when I came to London unemployed, with a job interview lined up, but just coming to see what London might bring me. And so that was my final move down to London. My first job here landed me just purely by accident in international education, and I was working for a private college called Holborn College, where they did degrees in law and business, which were offered to students from India, Pakistan, Ghana, Nigeria, various other places, Russia I think as well. And I was the student services officer there. And I hadn't done this kind of thing before, but I shared an office with someone who looked after accommodation, and she and I tried out all kinds of things like a mentoring scheme, a newsletter. We had student elections for a student committee. So it was a great place to try things out, which I could then put on my CV and talk about when I went for job interviews at proper universities. And the first university job I had in London was at London Metropolitan University, and I went there as Assistant International Student Advice and Information Officer, quite a mouthful. And I did a couple of years in the Student Services Department at London Met. Really steep learning curve, meeting students from all over the world, studying all kinds of different subjects at different levels, sometimes them not really knowing what year they were in because they were doing resits or had gap years, and just piecing that together, and mostly helping them with orientation, settling in, and then immigration visa extensions. From London Met, then I moved to Imperial College London, where I was an international officer, and the job was initially a mix of strategy and operational, and my operational stuff was still immigration visa extensions and contributing to the Welcome Programme. And we really got a chance there to grow our Welcome Programme from like a one-day event into a day with workshops, a 3-day thing, and eventually from Imperial College we came and brought our students to International Students' House as part of their orientation. And I'd known about International Students' House since I'd been at London Met. It was a place where I would come for meetings, for training. There were partnerships between International Students' House and London Metropolitan University for scholarships. So it was always on my horizon. And then one year, I think it was probably 2014 autumn, we brought some students from Imperial College to International Students' House as part of their orientation. And the then Dean was chatting to us after the event. And he said, well, I'm going to be retiring in 12 months' time. So my job's open for grabs if anybody's interested. The seed was sown, and I was on the lookout for that job from that time onwards. I went for it with single-minded precision, and that's how I ended up coming here to International Students' House and becoming Dean of Student Life. There's no other job like being Dean of Student Life at International Students' House. It is pretty unique. I have described it to our patron, Princess Anne, as the good, the bad and the ugly. And it is. It's being with students in their good times and in their tough times, and just making sure that that positive experience that I had on my study abroad when I was in Salamanca and visited a lot of Spain that time is something that is available then to other people who are coming to London. I was never a student in London. I can't imagine what it must be like to be a student in London. And I was not a student during the time of YouTube, of Facebook, of WhatsApps, any of those things. So anything I can do to support students through this new challenging time to be a student, in London in particular, is what is most rewarding to me. As we celebrate International Women's Day, I'd just like to say to any young women who are out there who might be living on a farm in the middle of nowhere like I was, whose family might have ideas about what is the right thing for them to study or the right thing for them to do with their lives, follow your heart. Do what works best for you, and don't be too set in the one route. I mean, my journey shows that although I was destined for academia, coming to London and changing direction hasn't been a disaster. It's been really rewarding for me, and it's enabled me to be able to look other PhD students in the eye and say, I know what's going on with you. So a PhD, yes, it's a great thing to do. It may not lead to an academic career, but it may open your doors to other things. And I think the nicest thing for me in all of my university jobs has been walking around a place of learning, but knowing that I'm not responsible for the education, but just for making the whole experience a positive one.